Hi, participants of Digital Skills for Creative and Cultural Industries projects. My name is Avril Joffe. I am the UNESCO Chair in Cultural Entrepreneurship and Policy at the Wits School of Governance in South Africa, Johannesburg. And I'm going to be speaking to you about the 2005 Convention.
Quadrennial Periodic Report, the QPR, is based on the 2005 UNESCO Convention, which has a series of goals, and they are listed on the top. The first one is support sustainable systems of governance for culture. This is a very important goal for UNESCO. The 2005 Convention gives every government the sovereign right. A government is called a member state because they are member states of UNESCO. The sovereign right to protect and promote its own cultural expression. In other words, to ensure that the culture of their country also has visibility in the international space. And this was a very important principle to go against the idea that there should be free trade on all commodities and goods and services. And the idea is that cultural goods and services are not mere commodities. Why? Because they embody symbolic value. They embody identity and meaning of a country. So this is a very important goal, and it goes to the heart of what the UNESCO 2000 Convention is trying to say to all of us. And there are 4 sub-goals of this one. The 4 sub-goals, which is around what are the policies and measures that exist to support the cultural and creative sector. That's part 1 of goal 1. The second one is, what is the extent of media diversity? Do you have regulation and policy to support the diversity of media? In other words, you don't only have a state broadcaster, you don't only have a public broadcaster, you have commercial broadcasters, you have community broadcasters, you have different forms of expression in the media that allow for different voices and different opinions to be expressed. All right. And this is about policies and measures that support the diversity of media. The third area under goal 1 is, what is the country doing to support digital expressions? We know that the internet and digital technologies have fundamentally altered the value chains of the cultural and creative industries, almost to the extent that we have no value chain. Why? Because a creator can talk directly to the consumer, can bypass production, distribution houses, and so on. It's almost altered value chains to create what we call value networks. And these value networks need to be regulated. Otherwise, what happens to your cultural expression on the internet is it disappears, and it can be plagiarized, it can be stolen, it doesn't have protection. And governments have to have an obligation to support your ability to showcase your work on the digital environment, right? So the digital environment is very important as part of a sustainable system of governance for culture, which is goal 1. The final part of goal 1 is partnering with civil society. Again, as I said earlier, this is the only convention that insists that civil society has to be involved in the policy development, the policy implementation, and the policy reporting around culture and creative industries. And so the QPR, the Quadrennial Periodic Report that is asking for your assessment is, to what extent is civil society involved? Who's involved from civil society? Which artists associations? Which communities of creatives and cultural entrepreneurs? And what skills and capacities are being developed for civil society by the government? So government has to report on the QPR, and civil society has to report on the QPR separately. It has its own reporting structure. Why? Because the UNESCO wants to ensure that civil society has got a voice in the final QPR as well. So that's goal 1, right? So we go back to the top. So that was goal 1 for culture, support sustainable systems of governance for culture. And in your reporting system, there'll be a space to write about each one of those. Goal 2 is to achieve a balanced flow of cultural goods and services and increase the mobility of artists and cultural professionals, because it's all about people moving from your country into another country, or your goods and services moving from your country to another country, or your activities. Activities could be a performance, an exhibition. It doesn't just have to be a good or service. Remember, the UNESCO Convention is not only about commercial, culture, and creative sector. It's about all cultural expressions, whether it's for private profit, whether it's for not-for-profit, whether it's publicly organized, whether it's privately organized, whether it's done by the universities, whatever. It's agnostic as to where the cultural expression emerges from. It's only about whether it's contemporary, right? So to achieve a balanced flow, as I said earlier, there are 3 sub-areas of that. The one is, to what extent do artists have mobility? The mobility of artists and cultural professionals, what policies and measures support the outward and inward mobility of artists? In other words, your ability to attend exhibitions, to attend biennale, to attend conferences and all that sort of thing. And what operational programs support the mobility of artists, especially from developing countries? And what is a flow of goods and services? To what extent can you export easily and do you import easily? Because remember, one of the principles of the UNESCO Convention is openness to other cultures. So you don't only want to export, you also want to import. You want to be able to consume a diversity of cultural expressions, whether it comes from your own country or from other countries. And so it's asked what policy and measures ensures that there's that balance of trade between, and what information systems are there to evaluate this? So those are questions that it's asking. And finally, it says, to what extent have you inserted in your country into all your treaties and agreements, whether they be bilateral or multilateral or regional, the principles enshrined in the 2005 Convention? In fact, some countries simply say we honor and support everything to do with the UNESCO 2005 Convention, and nothing in this agreement will undermine that convention. Simpler. So you don't have to isolate and identify everything. You simply say you support and adhere to the principles of the 2005 Convention. So the question is asking, what in your country have you done? What have you done to ensure this is present in all your treaties and agreements? Okay, the third goal for the UNESCO Convention is to integrate culture in sustainable development frameworks, right? And this is an important goal because, as you know, our planet is under stress. We have a climate emergency. And so it's really important that how culture can support this, can actually overcome and ensure visibility and awareness about climate emergency issues, as well as the development of the sustainability of the culture expressions. We want to protect and promote the diversity of cultural expressions, not just promote, we want to protect. All right. So it's a very important principle of the 2005 Convention. So the question is, to what extent is culture integrated into your national development plans? Anything written by government, your strategy for the country, your any public documents, what does it say about culture? And does it talk about cultural identity, nation building, cultural expressions, culture and creative industries, heritage, all of it? Or does it only talk about some of it? So that's an assessment we have to do about where does culture sit in our national development plans and policies. And the second part of that is, where do we sit in the international cooperation for sustainable development? Don't forget the 2005 Convention has an obligation for developed countries to support developing countries. That's the heart of the IFCD. This program that is supporting this training is the International Fund for Cultural Diversity. That fund should be mostly beefed up by developed countries, putting in money so that developing countries can be supported to develop the capacity building, the understanding, the awareness, and so on. So this question is asking, To what extent do your development cooperation strategies include action plans to support diverse cultural expressions? And to what extent does development cooperation programs strengthen the creative sectors in developing countries? And then finally, goal 4 is to promote human rights and fundamental freedoms. The principle of UNESCO's 2005 convention is without freedom of artistic expression, there can be no convention application. It will not work. It rests entirely on fundamental freedoms. It rests on artistic expression, the freedom of artists, creatives, cultural professionals to speak up, to paint, to draw, to perform, to have lyrics that say whatever they want to say, right? There can be no censorship on that, because then the 2005 convention simply won't exist. It cannot exist in any environment where fundamental freedoms are not enshrined. So the question is always, to what extent is this enshrined in your constitutions, in your very acts, in all your legislation, so that people feel they can really speak up, and that key issue of gender equality is being adhered to. Because gender equality is one of those real problems across the globe. We need some balance. We do need balance. We need to make sure that there's balance between men and women. Gender equality does not mean it's only women. Gender equality means that there's equality, that everybody has equal access, that everybody is earning the same amounts for the same kinds of work. So that's what we mean by gender equality. So there needs to be monitoring systems that assess that, assess the levels of representation, assess the participation of women in as audience or as performers or as artists, whatever the artistic discipline is. And then artistic freedom, as I said, it must be enshrined in policies and measures of your country, and that they are really promoting the area that we were talking about earlier, the social and economic rights of artists and cultural professionals. That's part of artistic freedom. Part of artistic freedom is that people have access to fairness in pay, decent work opportunities, equal opportunities for work, being able to be protected socially, that people are artists and cultural professionals and creators are not dying without any funeral benefits, without any social protection for when they cannot work. So what is the status in your country of your ability to access as a freelancer, as an independent contractor, social protection? So that's that point. So that's the fullness of the 2005 convention. Right. And I hope by looking at those 4 goals, supporting a sustainable system of governance for culture, achieving a balanced flow of goods and services and artist mobility, integrating culture in development frameworks, and promoting human rights and fundamental freedoms, you can see how this supports you as artists and creators to ensure that you have a robust, vibrant cultural life in your country.